You're a reporter from a major news network. It's February 1991, and you're sitting in a Bradley fighting vehicle racing across the Iraqi desert with the 1st Infantry Division. Shells are landing nearby. You hear machine gun fire. The soldiers around you are loading weapons and calling out enemy positions. You're trying to hold your camera steady while the Bradley bounces over sand dunes. This is combat. Real combat. Not watching from behind lines or getting briefed hours later. You're in it, and you're going to broadcast what you see to millions of Americans tonight. This is embedded journalism, and Desert Storm invented it. Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about how Desert Storm changed war reporting forever by creating the embedded journalist system. The Pentagon set up pools where reporters lived with combat units, rode in their vehicles, ate their food, and experienced the war alongside troops. It was unprecedented access. Previous wars had correspondents who traveled with military units, but the scale and organization of embedding in Desert Storm created a new model. Reporters became part of the story in ways that made audiences feel closer to combat than ever before. But it also created tensions. Did embedded reporters lose objectivity? Were they being used for propaganda? Let's explore what really happened. The Pentagon learned hard lessons from Vietnam about media relations. In Vietnam, reporters had relatively free access to combat zones. They could go where they wanted, film what they saw, and report without much censorship. The result was graphic coverage that turned public opinion against the war. Body bags on the evening news, burning villages, the horrors of combat brought into American living rooms. The military blamed negative media coverage for losing public support. When planning Desert Storm, Pentagon officials wanted to manage media better. The solution was the pool system. Instead of allowing hundreds of reporters to roam freely, the Pentagon organized them into small pools attached to specific units. Each pool would have print reporters, television crews, photographers. They'd be assigned to a division or regiment, travel with that unit, and share their coverage with other news organizations. This gave the military control over where reporters went while still providing media access. It was a compromise between total censorship and complete freedom. Reporters hated the pool system at first. They felt constrained, unable to pursue stories independently. Military escorts watched everything they did. Stories had to be reviewed by military public affairs officers before transmission. Delays meant news was sometimes hours or days old by the time it aired. Bob Simon from CBS famously broke away from the pools and tried reporting independently. He got captured by Iraqi forces and spent 40 days as a prisoner. His experience showed the risks of going outside the system. But some reporters found the embedded experience incredibly valuable. Molly Moore from the Washington Post was embedded with Marine units during the Ground War. She rode in vehicles, slept in tents with troops, shared their dangers. Her reporting gave readers an intimate view of what combat was actually like for the Marines she was with. The access was extraordinary. She could interview commanders before battles, watch troops react under fire, document the human experience of war in ways that briefing room coverage couldn't capture. The military had mixed feelings about embedded reporters. On one hand, having journalists living with troops created opportunities to show how professional and capable American forces were. Reporters would see soldiers' courage, dedication, and competence firsthand. That coverage could boost public support. On the other hand, reporters might witness things the military didn't want publicized. Friendly fire incidents, mistakes, scared soldiers. Things that complicated the narrative of clean, precise victory. The relationship between reporters and troops was complex. Initially, many soldiers were suspicious of journalists. Vietnam had taught them to distrust media, but living together, sharing hardships created bonds. Soldiers realized these reporters were experiencing the same dangers, eating the same terrible food, sleeping in the same uncomfortable conditions. Some journalists became accepted as part of the unit. Others remained outsiders, tolerated but not embraced. Lieutenant Colonel James Wilson commanded a tank battalion that had embedded reporters. He said it was strange having cameras around during combat. You're planning an assault, trying to keep your soldiers alive, and there's a reporter asking questions about how you feel. It was surreal, but most of the reporters were professional. They understood they couldn't interfere with operations. They stayed out of the way during critical moments. And some of their coverage showed Americans what we were doing over here, which was valuable. The coverage from embedded reporters was dramatically different from what came out of briefing rooms. Briefings gave strategic overview, maps, statistics, sanitized descriptions of operations. Embedded reporters showed individual soldiers, scared but determined, equipment breaking down and being repaired, the chaos and confusion of combat. It was grittier, more human, more real. Audiences connected with it in ways that briefing footage never achieved. Television coverage was particularly powerful. Cameras captured soldiers preparing for battle, vehicles racing across the desert, explosions in the distance. One network aired footage from inside a Bradley during combat. Viewers could hear the crew's radio chatter, feel the vehicle's movement, sense the tension. It was the most visceral war coverage Americans had seen since Vietnam. Some criticized it as war pornography. Others praised it as honest journalism showing the reality of combat. The tension between access and security was constant. Military censors reviewed stories to ensure they didn't reveal sensitive information. Troop movements, unit locations, casualties before families were notified, all had to be protected. Most reporters understood and accepted reasonable security concerns, but some felt the censorship went beyond security into image management. Stories that made the military look bad were delayed or heavily edited. Stories that emphasized American superiority sailed through quickly. The embedded journalists also faced ethical questions. When you live with troops, share their dangers, rely on them for survival, can you remain objective? If the unit you're embedded with does something wrong, will you report it? Or will loyalty to people who have protected you cloud your judgment? These weren't abstract questions. Reporters embedded with units that experienced friendly fire incidents had to decide what to report and how. Some filed complete stories. Others self-censored, not wanting to harm the troops they'd bonded with. The most controversial coverage came from reporters who stayed in Baghdad throughout the war. Peter Arnott particularly became a lightning rod. He wasn't embedded with coalition forces. He was reporting from enemy territory, showing what coalition bombing looked like from the receiving end. His footage of damaged civilian areas and casualties was used by Iraqi propaganda. Critics called him a traitor, said he was helping the enemy. Supporters said he was doing journalism, showing all sides of the war. The debate raged throughout the conflict. After Desert Storm, the embedded journalist model became standard for American military operations. Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq in 2003 all featured embedded reporters. The system was refined, rules clarified, but the basic concept remained. Give journalists access to combat units in exchange for accepting security restrictions and military control over movement. It worked from the military's perspective. Coverage was generally favorable while providing the appearance of press freedom. Critics argue embedding compromises journalism. Reporters become too close to their subjects, lose objectivity, essentially become public relations for the military. They point to the overwhelmingly positive coverage from embedded reporters in Desert Storm versus the more critical coverage from independent journalists or those in Baghdad. The system is designed to generate supportive coverage by creating emotional bonds between reporters and troops. Defenders say embedding provides access that improves coverage. Without it, reporters would be stuck in hotels watching briefings, getting no closer to reality than viewers at home. Embedding lets journalists witness combat, interview soldiers under fire, document the human experience of war. Yes, there are constraints, but the alternative is no access at all. The best journalism comes from being there, and embedding makes that possible. For the soldiers who had embedded reporters with them, opinions vary. Some appreciated having their story told, having someone document what they experienced. Others felt reporters were tourists, experiencing danger for a few days then leaving while soldiers stayed for months. A few resented the cameras, felt their suffering was being exploited for ratings. Most fell somewhere in between, accepting embedded reporters as part of modern warfare. The technology of the time limited what embedded reporters could do. This was 1991. Satellite phones were huge and expensive. Video editing equipment was heavy. Getting footage from the field to broadcast was complicated. Reporters couldn't just pull out a phone and stream live video. They relied on military communications infrastructure or waited until they could physically transport tapes to transmission facilities. This built-in delay gave military censors time to review, but also made reporting less immediate than it would become in later conflicts. If you were an embedded reporter during Desert Storm, or a soldier who had reporters embedded with your unit, leave a comment below. The embedded journalism story is about the tension between the public's right to know and military security, between journalist independence and access, between showing war's reality and maintaining operational security. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. Embedded journalism as we know it was born in Desert Storm. The model invented there, with all its advantages and compromises, has shaped war coverage for over 30 years. It gives audiences closer access to combat than briefings ever could. But it also gives the military more control over the narrative than independent journalism would allow. That trade-off, access for control, defines how America sees its wars. Desert Storm proved the model worked, at least from the Pentagon's perspective. Whether it serves journalism and the public interest is still debated. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We're telling the complete story of Desert Storm, including how the war was covered and how that coverage shaped public understanding of what was happening. I'll see you in the next one.